Okay, let's open up to page, first of all, y'all know we're on the mark of the beast. And what we're going to do is expose the lie. See that? Exposing the lie. Okay? Because it's hogwash what they say, you know. And of course, that's the demon's way, is to try and put fear in the hearts and the minds of the people to make them be distracted from the truth. Because if you can live on fear, then you're never going to seek the truth because you'll be scared to do anything. Let's see. Let's back up here to page 105 here because there's a few things here we want to notice here. It says Ishtar is Easter. Okay. The rabbits and colors egg represents the goddess of the fertility Ishtar, which is Easter. And Easter is one of the main holidays in churchianity today and has nothing to do with the resurrection of our Savior. And if you notice here, it shows the two eggs there, okay? This one is, of course, shows the serpent wrapped around the egg on the right, and then that's Typhoon's egg. Typhoon was a mythological creature which was a giant serpent and other things. But this other one here is the sacred egg of Heliopolis, okay? The sacred egg of Heliopolis. Heliopolis is the city of the sun. Now, if you notice at the top, there's a crescent moon, right? You see that today, right? The Muslims have that and so forth. Well, of course, that's because Allah actually had to do with the worship of a moon god, okay? But I want you to notice, because it says Heliopolis, okay? Heliopolis, the ancient Egyptian cult center, which you find as the name On, O-N, in the Hebrew Bible, was renamed Heliopolis by the Greeks, okay? Because that's where the sun god Ra, or that's in Egyptian, and then Helios was the Greek name, okay? And so Heliopolis was actually the capital of the province of Goshen. Now, where is Goshen at? Y'all surely remember what Goshen is, right? The land of Goshen, right? That's where the Israelites were at, remember? Remember, they came and they settled in the land of Goshen, okay? So you can see that by this being in that area, the Israelites would have been very familiar with that. And they would have known about this because they knew about the sun god worship and so forth. Because remember, the scriptures plainly tell you over and over and over again that they brought forth with them the things out of Egypt that Yahweh says, don't take with you. You know, forsake Egypt, don't go back to it. But many return back to it, remember. So this is the northern Egyptian territory of the Nile Delta there, where it's mentioned about Yosef in the narrative in the book of Genesis at that time. Now, another interesting thing here is when you look down here where it talks Ishtar, the descent of, okay, on the bottom of page 105. If you notice here, Ishtar was a Babylonian Assyrian fertility goddess known in cultures as Astarte, Ashtartu, and Asheroth, okay? But what's interesting is you go down, it talks about her, and it says that she was slain and impaled. Okay, so you can see how Satan will mimic and take things that Yahweh says, because Yeshua knew, you know, from the beginning of the world, the prophecy spoke about the fact that Yeshua would be put to death, and he knew that he was going to be impaled. And so, you know, Satan, of course, counterfeits those things. Okay, so if you turn over to page 106 here, this is another definite proof that Easter is just another pagan custom brought into Christianity by the deception that it was on the day of the resurrection of our Savior. Now you see here this giant egg, okay? You don't have your books. You really need to bring a book, okay? There's this giant egg. You see it's pretty big there because there's two men right there. The size of it's pretty large, okay? Now, this egg here was supposedly had fallen from heaven, okay? Now, I want to read you something here. This is in Acts chapter 19. And it says there was a certain man named Demetrius who was a silversmith, and he made silver shrines of the goddess Artemis, okay, or Diana. And it says that it brought in a lot of profit for him. And so when Shaul, the apostle Shaul and them had visited there, then they thought they were in danger of not only losing the trade, but also of the temple of the great goddess, Artemis, becoming despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worships. Okay, so you can see there that at this time, they were scared of this because they thought, well, all Asia and the whole world worships this goddess, okay? Now, they had a big problem there, you know, and people got all roused up and stuff and started shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians," and you know, the town clerk came out and tried to calm them down, and he says, "Men of Ephesus, you know, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is the temple guardian of the great goddess Artemis, and of the sacred stone image of her that fell from Zeus?" Okay? Now, the reason why I'm telling you this is because you can see how all of these things are connected. Here, this giant sacred stone of this goddess supposedly had fell from Zeus out of heaven, okay? Now, you see that big egg, okay? A big egg there. Now, this is reading from 2 Babylons on page 109. It says, "In ancient times, eggs were used in the religious rites of the Egyptians and also of the Greeks. And they were hung up for mystic purposes in their temples. Now, from Egypt, these sacred eggs can be distinctly traced to the banks of the Euphrates River. The classic poets are full of the fable of the mystic egg of the Babylonians. And thus it's a tale that was told by Hyginus, the Egyptian, the learned keeper of the Palatine Library at Rome." You know, Palatine was one with the 7 hills at Rome. And he says, quote, "An egg of wondrous size is said to have fallen from heaven into the river Euphrates." An egg of wondrous size. Now, that's that picture that you see there. Suppose it had fallen from heaven, okay? And remember what we read in Acts, that this sacred stone image fell from Zeus, okay? And then when it fell into the river Euphrates, the fishes rolled it to the bank. So all the fish came and nudged up to it and began to swim and push this giant egg up on the bank, where the doves, having settled upon it, hatched it. And out came Venus, who afterward was called the Syrian goddess, okay? So keep an eye on your eggs, okay? Make sure you don't. But the thing is here is that it talks about how it fell from heaven, okay? And they were very clever, too, because what they used to do is, you know, when they had artists and sculptors and stuff like this who made different things sometimes for the religions, for the gods and so forth, for the priests and all this, if they wanted to keep the people in suspense and make them think that the gods delivered this, you know what they did. They just simply wiped them out. They killed the artist or the sculptor and so forth, so that they could never trace it back and say, no, this man over here made this, you know. So they practice these same tactics of terrorism that's always been around. Ichthus. Ichthus is the fish symbol. You know what you see in the back of people's cars all the time, trucks, the fish symbol, okay? Now remember, the fishes rolled this giant egg up to the bank. They were sacred to Venus. Remember that. The fish and the doves. Now this Ichthus, okay, the Greeks and the Romans had many pagan symbols, and they used the fish symbol. It was used before Christianity came about, okay? In pagan beliefs, Ichthus was the offspring of the ancient sea goddess, or Targetus. and was known in mystic systems as, let me just read this, as Aphrodite, okay? So you see here that before Christianity adopted the fish symbol, it was already well known by the pagans as the great mother and the womb, because you look at the way it's shaped. Its link to fertility, birth, and the natural force of women was acknowledged also by the Celts, as well as pagan cultures throughout northern Europe. In certain non-Christian beliefs, the fish also had been identified with reincarnation and life force. Okay? So reincarnation. Now that's trying to steal the power of Yahweh. Okay? Because you know who's going to resurrect the dead. It's only going to be the saints of Yahweh. But of course, they take that on and try and say that, well, you don't need mankind. You don't need Yahweh's plan. All you need to do is just be reincarnated. Okay? And therefore, that would eliminate that part of Yahweh's plan. And that's Satan's tactics, of course. Now, going back to the book here, it says, the following is from the book Babylon Mystery Religion, Ancient and Modern by Ralph Woodrow. Okay, copyright 1966. This is, well, this is not a real great example of a book, but it's a book, okay? Mystery Religion. Babylon Mystery Religion. Now this guy, he did back up his stuff at one time, okay? Alexander Hitchcock, the one who wrote the two Babylons. But then he sold out. He sold out to the Catholics, and now you can't find this book. His ministry, he still has his ministry going, but he took this away. Now the book is called Babylonian Connection with a big question mark. Like, is it truly? And so what he does now is he refutes his own writings, what he said, and he tries to refute everything that Hislop wrote about the mystery Babylonian religion. So, what he says in his book here is, later the fish body was removed and just the fish head mitre was used to adorn the head of the great mediatorial god. On several Maltese pagan coins, this god, whose characteristics are the same as that of Osiris, the Egyptian Nimrod, was shown with the fish body removed and only the fish head mitre remaining. Of course, there is, I don't know whether you can see it or not, but you can see the little fish head that's on the guy. These are also wings and stuff. It's a very small picture there. But this will show it to you. This is Dagon, okay? Now, and you can see it very clearly. That's the picture this is the actual stone sculpture, and then this is a picture showing you tracing the outlines of it, showing it to you. So you can definitely see the fish head there. You see the tail, the scales, and everything on this body. Here's another one, which you can definitely see it on this one. And I mean, this one right here, you can really see. I mean, you see the eye, and you see even the mouth and stuff of the fish, the way. And you notice how it encompasses the whole body of these men, okay? And they have, and then this one is very old, looks like it's very weathered and so forth. But you see the two here, and then also here. So, and this, of course, is supposed to represent the tree of life. And then there you have the sun god up there. But you can see how they wore this outfit, okay? And this was, of course, the fish god that they worship. Well, eventually as time went on, like you see in the Catholic Church now, they just did completely away with the whole rest of the body. However, there are certain things that still give it away, because if you ever look at the mitre, you have the mitre, which of course is definitely the fish's mouth open, but then you have two pieces that come down off of that, and of course that represents the tail section there. So all they did was just shorten, and they pulled up the tail section all the way to the top of the mouth there, basically what they did, so that they wouldn't be walking around. I mean, the Pope would look pretty funny, and I think people would really say something if you went walking around in a Dagon costume, Of course, you could do that for Halloween now, the world could do that. They'd be right on if they did. Okay, the letter T here, continuing on here on page 107, the letter T, of which the cross worship originated, stood for the name of the god Tammuz. Ishtar, Easter, was the mother of Tammuz. Okay? Now, it shows several of the crosses there. You have this one, which is very familiar with the Christian cross. This is the Latin cross. And that's the one that you see that's so familiar with all of Christianity. Why? Because it's a Latin cross. Okay? And all the world has gone the way of the Catholic Church. And then you have the Tau, and then you have the Calvary cross, and the Celtic cross, and then St. Andrew's, and the Greek, and the Maltese. Okay? Now, centuries before the Christian era, the cross was honored as a religious symbol of the people of Babylon. So this is before Christianity ever came about, okay? So you can see the Babylonian mystery connection. Yes, there is a Babylonian mystery connection, you know. As it says, ancient and modern. It's there. You can't escape these things. Remember, even the scripture tells you there's nothing new under the sun. So, and it was seen on some of the oldest monuments, and historians say that it was a symbol associated with Tammuz. But what was the significance of the cross symbol in Babylon, and how was it associated with the false savior Tammuz? Well, the cross symbol, in its original form, came from the first letter of the name Tammuz, the T. The same sign of the cross that Rome now worships was used in the Babylonian mysteries as Hislop. That which is now called the Christian cross was originally no Christian emblem at all, but was the mystic Tau of the Chaldeans and Egyptians. All right, now this is important because we're going to see later on in the history of mankind where all these nations. The true original form of the letter T, the initial of the name of Tammuz, was used in every variety of way as the most sacred symbol. It was used as an amulet over the heart. It was marked on the official garments of the priests and on the official garments of Rome today. And then you see here, we will remember that the false savior of Babylon in the mysteries was represented in various ways and symbols, and one of his mystery forms was as a fish. Okay? And then it shows Dagon there as the fish god. Okay? Now, continuing on here, and this is the same, that's the same picture that we just looked at there that was in the in stone. Top of page 108, it says, though it originated in the paganism of Babylon, Dagon worship became essentially popular among the heathenistic Philistines. And, of course, Samuel was faced with having to compete against that and correcting the people for their ways. And another way that Dagon, the fish god, was depicted is seen in the illustrations as we saw. And this is the way it's pictured on Mesopotamian Babylonian sculptures. And as the noted Lanyard in Babylon and Nineveh has put it, he says, quote, the head of the fish formed a mitre above that of the man, while its scaly fan-like tail fell as a cloak behind, leaving the human limbs and feet exposed. Here then, in ancient times, was the use of the divided, somewhat pointed fish head mitre, as though the jaws of the fish were strikingly open and unmistakably counterpart of the mitre, the same shape that is worn by the Pope. Again, just like, this is those pieces I was telling you right here, this little piece right here that goes back. There's two of them that fan out, okay? And just like it says here, how it came down behind him here, they basically took this part here and just shortened it up to here and put it up on the top. So it still exposes the body, as they said. Now, as the noted Hislop puts it, in top of page 109, concerning the papal mitre, the two-horned mitre which the Pope wears when he sits at the high altar at Rome and receives the adoration of the cardinals is a very mitre worn by Dagon, the fish god of the Philistines and the Babylonians. Okay, so it's the very same thing. And it doesn't take much to be able to see that and to comprehend that. Even though they try, and the only reason why they try and refute it is because they don't want you to know the truth. And they want you to remain deceived. Now, the Roman Catholic Pope wears a fish head mitre honoring Dagon, the fish god. And this is past his writing on an ancient Babylonian worship. In ancient Babylonian worship, goes way back to the time of Babylon. Even though the Christian preachers do not wear the fish head mitre, they still perform many of the other acts of the same worship of these pagan gods. They also use the cross in their worship, and many display this pagan symbol on or in their churches. On or in their churches. In fact, many of their churches are actually shaped that way. Like your cathedrals. If you notice here in the cathedrals, okay, this is a cross. You see the cross right there? How it crosses? Okay? And many of the cathedrals, all the churches are shaped that way. And many of your, even in governments, you find the very same thing. Now, you remember Yeshua said, he was rebuking the Pharisees and stuff. He said, you hold back the keys to the kingdom, because you won't allow the truth to be taught. You hold it back. Well, and then you also have, remember, the keys of St. Peter and so forth, right? That's on the coat of arms and stuff. But if you notice here too, here's a key too. This is St. Peter's Basilica, okay? And if you notice, it kind of looks like a key, doesn't it? And right in the center there is, of course, that's the Asherah pole right there, which came from Egypt, by the way. That came from Heliopolis, okay? It was one of the surviving ones. Right now, the very tallest one, the tallest structure, the obelisk, is sitting over there now. And then one came to Rome, and it was moved under the penalty of death, and no one wanted to move the thing. And finally, one architect said, I'll take the job. And he brought it there, and he set it up. And then the others are, one is in New York, Central Park there, and then the other one is in London. So you have the two major, like London being the major financial capital of the European area, and then, of course, in New York and so forth. So it shows you the might and the power that the Vatican has. Then this over here, of course, is St. Peter's Basilica and stuff over here. So that's the key to their wickedness there, that they're trying to hide, but they can't really. You're not gonna keep Yahweh's people in the dark. Okay, let's go over to. Chapter 8 here says the beast's head to rise again. Now, I know what I was going to tell you too. Before we go on there, you remember we were talking about this egg and about the fish and so forth, right? You have Ashtoreth, okay? In the New International Standard Bible, in the New International Standard Bible, it talks about this goddess, and it says the name and the cult of the goddess was derived from Babylon, where Ishtar represented the evening and the morning stars and was accordingly androgynous, which means both male and female, okay? In origin, and under Semitic influence, however, she became solely female, but retained the memory of a primitive character by standing alone among the Asho-Babylonian goddess on a footing with equality with that of the male deities. So she, because she could be male or female, she remained that status. So in some countries she was worshipped as a female, some countries she was worshipped as a male. That's why the confusion is today with Satan. And, well, people don't know Satan's gender, In the King James Version, he's strictly male, right? Satan appears to be male always and stuff. Except Yahweh has allowed some things in there to reveal certain things if you read them properly. The local Ashtoreth, okay? Now these are the many. Remember, it says hence there were many Ashtoreth or Ashtaroth or Baals. Remember what it says in Corinthians: there's many lords and many gods and so forth, right? Well, they represented the various forms under which the goddess was worshipped in different localities. So wherever it was situated out. Sometimes she was addressed as Nama, the delightful one. The Philistines seem to have adopted her under her warlike form, but she was more usually the moon goddess and was accordingly symbolized by the horn of a cow. at Ashkelon, when Herodes places her most ancient temple, she was worshipped under the name, okay, as a woman with the tail of a fish. And the fish were associated, the fish was sacred to her, and elsewhere, the doves were her sacred symbol. The fish and the doves, and that's what we just read about earlier, about the fish and the doves. Now, one thing, if you notice what it said here too, is about she was worshipped as a woman with the fish, the tail of a fish. Okay. Now, this is where all the mythology and stuff you always get about the men being out at sea and all this kind of stuff, and about the mermaids and so forth. You know, all of these stories that they come up with. You know, this is where it comes up from, because she is known, of course, as being the deity of the sea, the keeper of the sea, and so forth. And then it says here, then page chapter 8 here on page 110. The beast's head to rise again, okay? The scriptures show that once more, Satan will take vengeance on those who will not accept the beast's mark. And then it talks about in Revelations 18 about how Babylon will fall. It's the hold of every foul spirit of demons and unclean and hateful birds and so forth. And then, of course, verse 5 talks about how her sins have reached into heaven, and Yahweh has remembered her iniquities. And, of course, it would all come to pass that his prophecies will be brought forth. And, of course, this whole system will come down. And then, of course, the saints will take over. Because you notice in Revelations 18:24, in her was the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and all those who were slain upon the earth. Okay, so whether they were prophets or saints, believers of Yahweh, or not, if they were slain, they were slain. And the blood, will be taken into account of all these things. That shows that she is responsible for these things because that's what she's always used. All these tactics, all the way back, stemming back to the Nimrod system, if you remember. Okay? And then on page 111 here, it talks about Revelation 6, it talks about the souls and the testimony, those who were slain for the word of Yahweh. A lot of people were murdered. And like Pastor brought out, it could have been trillions of people. But for sure we know it was billions. And then it talks about in Daniel 5 about that she makes war with the saints, until the ancient days come and judgment is given to the saints, and of course the saints take over the kingdom. All right. Now jump over to page 112 here. Turn the page, and you see here the great whore, is the mother church, and her daughters, of course, are called the harlots, and they all follow her. And these deceived churches, of course, they haven't accepted Yahweh's laws, so therefore they continue to reject Yahweh's laws. They continue to reject his name. They don't use it. And, of course, they have spread this worldwide. And as Revelations 12:9 says, Satan has the whole world deceived. Okay, this portion here, the heads of the beast. It says, we have already proven that the word horns, used prophetically in the books of Daniel and Revelation, are religious powers. The whole world is involved with the beastly mystery system. The whole world has accepted the beastly government and the mark of the beast, which are the pagan holidays in honor of Nimrod, as we have proven thoroughly. Okay, so it says here that the whole world is involved in this beastly mystery religion, okay, this whole system. So the whole world's accepted this. Now, Yochanan, in Revelation 13:1, he saw this beast rise up out of the sea, which had 7 heads. And these 7 heads are 7 mountains. And, of course, if you look up prophetically, mountains refer to governments, okay, and governmental ruling powers. So he sees these 7 heads. And all this has to do with these are 7 heads, or 7 mountains that rule over the 7 world powers in 7 different stages of the history of mankind. Egypt, of course, was the first world power, okay? World power. It had complete control of all the known world at that time. And we see that in Egypt was worshipped, of course, Egypt worshipped the hidden god known as Amen. People still say that. The Christians say amen to everything. and in their prayers with and so forth, that we saw earlier. It's not in the scriptures. And Amen or Amen was the Egyptian, or Amen-Ra was the Egyptian sun god, and they don't understand that they're worshiping the sun god. But Egypt was the land of Ham, and we see in Psalm 105 verses 23 and 27, it says, Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob soldiered in the land of Ham, the land of Ham. In verse 27, it says, they showed his signs among them and wonders in the land of Ham. And then we also see in Psalm 105, verses 21 and 22, they forgot Yahweh their Savior, which had done great things in Egypt, wondrous things in the land of Ham. So you notice Egypt is the land of Ham, okay? And then you go back to Genesis, you can see in Genesis where it talks about the different descendants of Noah's sons, and it shows you there that they went, that Ham brought forth his descendants are the ones who actually came forth and started Egypt. Now, and scholars also think possible that Ham actually went to Egypt along with him, his descendant there, to actually make sure that everything worked right and actually develop Egypt. And so Egypt grew into a world power, okay? Now, and that was around 42-41 before Yeshua, that Egypt was the first world power. Now, the second world power, remember there's 7 of them here described, Assyria. Now, Egypt's power eventually, it waned, and then Assyria came to be a world power around 700 BY, okay, about 700 years before Yeshua. That wasn't too long before Yeshua's time. So Assyria, fought against Yahweh, and of course didn't keep Yahweh's laws either, just like the Egyptians did not. And in 2 Kings 17, verse 6 and verse 24, we read what says, in the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Assyria, he took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and in Habat by the river of Goshen in the cities of Medes. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, from Cutha and from Ava and from Hamath and the Sepharim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel, and they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof. Okay, so this was referring to the Israelite, the captivity. You remember Israel went into captivity and Yahweh went into captivity. Now what they did is they took the Israelites out away from Samaria, okay, and they put them in a different area. Well, the reason they did that is because when you came in, if you really wanted to devastate a people and really break them down and take control over them, then you would move them out of their location. Because if you have to take a people from this area and move them over into this area, when they get over here, they're going to be all just scattered because they don't know where they're at. They're not used to the surrounding areas like they were in their actual locality. And so that weakened the mind of the people, and it brought them down under subjection under their power. Now, Unger's Bible Dictionary on page 102 says the people of Assyria derived their religious ideas from Babylon, okay? And also, Babylon and Assyria were very close. They were almost as one empire at one time, okay? But eventually, Babylon became the third world power. And, of course, the prophet Daniel showed his dream in which Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed. And in Daniel chapter 2, verse 31 to 34, he says, "But you, O king, which you saw that great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the form was so terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, and his breast and his arms were of silver, and his belly and his thighs of brass, and his legs of iron, and his feet part of iron and of clay. And you saw that till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and breaking to pieces." And of course, that's referring to the fact that, he said, "You are the head of gold." And of course, he was offered. He could have, the kingdom of Yahweh could have been set up had he repented and taken hold of it. And then eventually it goes down with the silver and then the brass. So as you go further down to the feet, of course, you get less and less of different value and so forth, to finally get down to the bottom where there's iron and there's clay that's mixed. Okay, well, iron and clay don't mix. It's not a very strong thing to be supporting this magnificent structure that was standing there, you know. So it was about ready to topple down, but then all of a sudden he saw this stone that was cut without hands, and there was just a stone appeared. And of course, that stone is the house of Yahweh, which will destroy all the Babylonian religion and actually bring it down. As it says in Revelation, it's fallen, okay? So that was the interpretation of his dream. Now, Daniel also gives the information of the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. He says that you are this head of gold in Daniel 2, verse 38. So Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, and Daniel told him in Daniel 2, verse 39, he says, and after you will arise another kingdom that's inferior to you, okay? So what Yahweh is showing us here is these different kingdoms that were going to take place and come about, these world powers. Now remember that, they're world powers. They're not just local kingdoms, they're world powers that have control over everything. And this is why you can always go back, and when you look at God worship, you can always trace it back, all the way back to Egypt, okay? And that's why it always has to do with the Greeks, the Babylonians, and the Egyptians. It's all the same stuff. They just changed the names, but continue to worship the same gods. So the Medo-Persians came about. And in Daniel 2:29 it says, and another third kingdom of brass, remember that was the brass part that he saw on the image, will bear rule over the earth. And then the next one, in Daniel 2:40, says the fourth kingdom will be strong as iron. That was the Greek Empire. After the Medo-Persians fell, the Greeks came in and they took over, and they became the fifth world power. And then it says in Daniel 2:40, which we're all familiar with, that the fourth kingdom will be strong as iron. Okay? Of course, that word iron also means cutting instruments and war instruments and so forth. So it shows you that they're strong through force. And then the Roman Empire is the sixth world power. The Romans came in and took over Greece, and they set up the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was a military empire. And since the time of Daniel, there has only been four great kingdoms that ruled the earth: the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greek, and the Romans. Okay? So no mere man without inspiration of Yahweh could have given such a singular, accurate accountants covering thousands of years of future history. In spite of often repeated efforts of kings and rulers to establish another world kingdom, they have utterly failed and will continue to fail. Because Yahweh said there's only going to be this many and no more. Okay? So no matter what man does, he never succeeds in trying to take over the world. But there were two world ruling kingdoms before Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and then there have been four since that time. So we see here in Revelation 17:9, it talks about five are fallen. It says, and there were seven kingdoms, five are fallen, one is, and the other is not yet come. And when it comes, it must continue a short space. Okay? Now remember, in Yahweh's prophecies and so forth, the understanding comes in different ways, and sometimes you have dual meanings and stuff to some of the prophecies and so forth as well. Now, he says here that these five are there, and they will continue for a short space. Now, remember, he says one is, and yet the other wasn't to come. Okay, well, one is, the one that was Rome. That was the sixth kingdom. That was the time, it was in existence in the time of Yochanan, the prophet Yochanan. But the seventh one hadn't come yet. Okay, so it was still Roman at his time when he lived, but the last one hadn't come yet. So we see here in Revelations 13:3, it says, and I saw one of his heads as it was wounded to death. Wounded to death. Now, in Revelations 13, verses 3 and 4, it continues on and it says, his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? So I ask you the question, who is able to make war with the beast? That's right. There's only one man on the face of this earth that can do that, right? And, of course, his war is not with weapons, but by the power of Yahweh. So one of these heads was wounded to death, okay? One of the heads, and remember, we talk about the heads here, these world-ruling empires. One of them was wounded to death, but after being wounded, the wound was healed, and then all the world wanders after the beast, right? So notice that. In verse 4, it says they worship the beast. So Daniel saw that this military part of the beast breaking into pieces because it was the feet. Remember, part iron, part clay. In Daniel 2, verse 41, it says, and therefore thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of the potter's clay and part of iron. The kingdom will be divided, and there shall be in it and there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as you saw that the iron mixed with the miry clay. So notice, it doesn't say that the kingdom is going to be destroyed and perish from the earth. It says that it's going to be divided, okay? And we see here that historically the Roman Empire was just that. It was divided. Here on page 116, it says, historically the Roman Empire under the military Caesars underwent change after the death and ascension of Yeshua, but it was not destroyed. After the change, military Rome was still in power, but under a new religious leadership, the popes. Now, the fall of military Rome can be researched easily, and here's an excerpt from the basic everyday encyclopedia. It speaks about its fall, and it says, Rome, the eternal city, okay? And it says, it was traditionally founded by Romulus and Remus, built on 7 hills, the Palatine, which we talked about earlier, the Capitoline, the Quirinal, the Esquiline, the Viminal, the Caelian, and Vatican. Now, Rome was the core and heart of the ancient Roman Empire. It was invaded by the hordes of barbarians and victim of plagues and natural diseases for hundreds of years after the decline of the empire. And in the 1500s, it came under the domination of the papacy, okay? And eventually what it led to is what you had is known as the Papal States, okay, which was territories that the popes basically ruled over and so forth, okay? Well, it came to a point to where that was destroyed, and the territories were taken over by the different nations that existed there, and basically the Pope was put out of business for a while, okay? He was confined to a very small area in which he lived. And let's see if this article talks about that. But it says Rome remaining, Rome remained almost uninterrupted until the papal control into 1870, when Rome was incorporated into the modern city of Italy. The Pope and his successors remaining voluntary prisoners in the Vatican until 1929, when the Lateran Treaty ended the papal claim to sovereignty over the metropolis. So they squeezed the Pope down because, the Pope was there were so many different evil popes, and it was no different than in the days of what you saw with the Sadducees. Okay, the Sadducees were not. They bought their way into the offices and so forth, and it was the same thing here with the popes. The popes bought their way into becoming a pope. It wasn't like as if there were these holy men that they looked upon and ended up picking them as they portray that they are. And it's really no different today. So, until the Vatican, until 1929, when the Lateran Treaty, that ended it. So the Vatican, one of the outstanding architectural beauties of the city, as well as the seat of the Roman Catholic Empire in church, is an enclave of Rome under the sovereign authority of the reigning pontiff. Now you see here, remember Revelations 13, it's 13:3. It said, and I saw one of the heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, it talked about, right? And all the world wandered after the beast. Now, one of the heads, remember you had Egypt, you had Assyria, you had Babylon, you had the Medo-Persians, you had the Greek, you had the Romans, and then you had the Papal Rome. The Roman Empire never died out. It just simply was divided, as we saw there. Okay. The headlines that had come out. Now, this is the San Francisco Chronicle, Tuesday, February 12th, 1929. And there you can plainly see where it says, "Heal wound of many years. Vatican again at peace with Italy after long quarrel." The interesting thing about this, if you notice this picture, here's Mussolini. He's the prime minister of Italy, which is the nation. Okay? Notice whose big picture's above him. The cardinal who signed the Lateran Treaty with him. So that right there is an indication of showing that the Vatican is much more powerful than Italy itself, you know. So that's one of the tactics in which they do this in the political field and so forth. Now, it's also in the, this ran worldwide. You also had it in the New York Times. And what this article, this is the article right here. And what it says is, Pope becomes ruler of a state again. It says, bells pealed and crowds cheer as treaty exchange restores his temporal sovereignty. Mussolini goes to the Vatican. Pius, which is Pope Pius, he sends blessings to the king, and the ruler voices thanks to the papacy. And, of course, the papacy gets a $39 million check. This is Rome, June 7th. It says, from 11 o'clock this morning, there was another sovereign independent state in the world. At that time, Premier Mussolini, as Italian foreign minister representing King Victor Emmanuel, the first Italian premier ever to cross the threshold of the Vatican, exchanged with Cardinal Gasperi, the papal secretary of state representing Pope Pius XI, ratifications of the treaty signed at the Lateran Palace on February 11th. That's both of them right there. And you see his name here. Mussolini and Gasperi signed historic Roman pact, okay, which is a treaty. And what they did is, remember, it settled the Roman question, which divided the Italian people because they had their dedication towards the Pope and the Church, and then they had their dedication towards being Italians. And so there's this separation of church and state. Separation of church and state. But, and this is supposed to have settled that question and brought them together. But by the simple act of Mussolini crossing over, and if you've ever seen pictures of the Vatican and stuff there is no fence, no territories or nothing. You just, all of a sudden, you're in Rome there, and then there's a marker on the street, and you walk over it, and you're in the Vatican. You're in another country there. And so by Mussolini doing that and walking over that borderline and doing that, he says, by this simple act, the sovereign independent state of Vatican City came into existence. Now, if you remember, it had to come into existence because that was in 1929, because remember, in 1934, Pastor was born, right? And you remember you have the fact that when the Lateran Treaty was signed, that caused Vatican City to come into existence. And then, of course, Pope Pius was there when Yisrayl Hawkins was born in 1934. And then, of course, you had Pope Pius the 12th, then John the 23rd, then Paul the 6th, John Paul the 1st, John Paul the 2nd, Benedict the 16th, and then, of course, Francis is now, who is the 8th and of the 7 kings. Okay? So 5 have fallen. They're all dead. And then you had the 7th, and then you have the 8th, who was of the 7th. Because you still have 2 popes today. And, of course, that's Satan's way of trying to say that these are her 2 witnesses, But I think Yahweh is a little bit more powerful. Okay, so it goes on. This article says, a few minutes later, Swiss guards, resplendent in multicolored uniforms and bearing rifles with fixed bayonets, marched out of the apostolic palace in which they had been confined in the past and took possession of the territory ceded by Italy. They mounted guard at its frontier. And at the same time, the historic bronze door leading into the Vatican Palace one side of which had been closed since 1870 as a sign of mourning for the loss of the Pope's temporal power, were thrown completely open again, amid cheers from both inside and outside the Vatican, to signify that peace had been reestablished between the Church and Italy. And I'm sure that was a gigantic celebration for those deceived people. That's what they figured, that was really something that was really great that took place. Okay, here on page 117, it says, to review now, there has been 7 world powers. Egypt and Assyria had risen and fallen by the time of Daniel. And then Babylon was in power at that time of Daniel's prophecy. Then you had the Medo-Persians, you had Greece, you had the military Rome, and then, of course, the papal Rome is the last one to arise. So that's a total of 7 world ruling powers, and no one else has ever taken over. Remember, you had the world power, you had world wars fought, okay, but you didn't see any of those nations that were fighting those wars take over. We're not under any other control except the papal power. It had to be set the way that Yahweh said. Because remember, Yahweh tells us the end from the beginning. Well, in the beginning was Egypt and Babylon, right? So it's all the same thing that has just repeated itself. So we see here in a copy from the Biblical and Theological Dictionary of 1833, proof here about the Romans. It says Roman Catholics are members of the Church of Rome, otherwise called papists, and you don't really hear that anymore because that sounds offensive. You refer to everybody as a Catholic and so forth. But in your old commentaries and stuff, they always talk about the papists. They talk about the Roman Catholics. So otherwise called papists, from the Pope being considered by them as the supreme head of the universal church, the successor of St. Peter, and the fountain of theological truth in ecclesiastical honors. He keeps his court in great state at the Palace of the Vatican and is attended to by 70 cardinals as his private counselors, in imitation of the 70 disciples of our Lord. Well, actually what that means there is, in fact, it's an imitation of, remember what they had? They had the great synagogue with the 70s and so forth. The Pope's authority in other kingdoms is merely spiritual, but in Italy he is a temporal sovereign. Well, actually he has that power throughout the nations because he makes them crumble, And Pope John Paul II, if you remember him, Pope John Paul II, and it's written about him, that man was very clever. And he used the media to his full advantage. And he could get people to believe anything and to make them side with him in various ways. And he had strong pull with the different emissaries, the officials that came, the nuncios, the papal nuncios, which is an ambassador. Like we have the United States has a papal nuncio, which is an ambassador of the United States that goes to the Vatican to be able to talk to the Pope and so forth and find things out and come back and let everybody know. But he used it to a T. I got an article I want to read you one day. But he says here, Louis VIII and the Allies, having in 1814 restored him to his throne and to those temporalities of which he was deprived by Bonaparte and the French Revolution, on the resuming of his government, Pope Pius VII also restored the order of the Jesuits and the Inquisition, so that the Roman Catholic religion is now reinstated in its ancient splendor and authority. In other words, just as it was before, so it is today. And we see here what it talks about in Revelations 13:7. It was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome him, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Okay? Kindreds, tongues, and nations. In other words, all people. And just as this article says here, the Roman Catholic religion is now reinstated into its ancient splendor and authority, just like it was at one time before, so it is. Okay? Now remember, it has the control. Remember, we read where it says that the deadly wound was healed, okay? So when this took place with Mussolini and stuff and the church was reinstated and so forth, that was the beginnings of it, okay, to become reinstated in the way it was. Now, I'm going to read something here from Pastor. This is from the 8th book of Israel, chapter 23, part 1, 8th book of Israel, part 1, chapter 23, and he says in verse 79, how could this possibly come about here? He says, you read it. He says, read it and notice what it says. Now, he's going to cause America, it's going to cause all those who dwell upon the earth. He causes the earth and all those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. This is the Roman Catholic, or the Holy Roman Empire, as it was called. Wounded unto death, but his deadly wound was healed. And it comes back stronger than ever. Blaspheming Yahweh in his house, and changing that is, causing the world to go against his laws. And he says this television was invented was part of the thing that was used to do this. He says, keep all these things in mind as you read. Now, the 12th book of Israel, part 2, chapter 17, verse 87, he says, the first beast before him, and caused the earth and all those who dwell in him to worship the first beast. He says, now this is the second beast that's pushing this religion, pushing it, forcing it, going out and taking in countries and saying, we're going to give you democracy. They call that freedom. The apostles said, while they promise you freedom, they're giving you death. And this is a death sentence that they're passing on to you, getting you to go against Yahweh's laws, sinning, you sin, and dying, you will die, and it's exactly what's taking place, whose deadly wound was healed. So she's using, the excuse of democracy to try and say that we're going to make you free, and you're going to have a free government and free reign, and you won't be oppressed by your leader and so forth. But like Pastor says, they're actually signing their own death warrant, because they do that in order to cause it to where they go in, they take away the democracy, they give them democracy, but when they do that, they destroy their government. So they've taken away peace from the earth, as it talks about in Revelation. You remember, and that really began when George W. Bush became president, and he went out and he stirred all this stuff up. And so everything has been destroyed since that time. So the Roman government is now, the Holy Roman Empire is still the Holy Roman Empire. That's never changed. Okay, that was simply the religion of the Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire, and it's still the religion that exists today. It's still the power. Okay, so the fact is that you don't see Roman legionnaires walking around doesn't mean that it's not still in power. It is. It's the world ruling power that rules the earth now, as Revelation says, that it has power over all nations, languages, tongues, all people. And it heavily influences everything that goes on, because that's what the Vatican is about. And the Vatican, the more you see about the Vatican, you see the ultra evil of this place, and the ultra evil of what these men do. You see these cardinals walking around in their robes, carrying their briefcases, going around all over the places, going to the Vatican Bank and all this kind of stuff, and no one knows. See, the thing is, you can't trace. That's why no one knows. They know that the Vatican is the richest organization on the face of this earth. It owns everything basically on the earth belongs to the Vatican, but you can't trace it. There's no money trail, because when you go to the Vatican Bank, they don't trace anything. There's no records of this, that, or the other, but it's so evil because they've got their hands into everything. You see the pharmaceutical industry, what they've done with that. They did away with holistic health and of the health, and call these men witch doctors and so forth, and use the propaganda, which there's even an office of propaganda in the Catholic Church that they use, and that's the ones who went out and used the propaganda against those in the Inquisition and so forth. And they've taken it to where they destroy the people's faith into believing that the earth can help itself, and that you can heal yourself with the herbs and so forth, and that this is the way that the Creator made it. And then, of course, because of the love of money, of oil, they wiped all that out and replaced it all with pharmaceuticals, drugs that are made from oil. That's why it says, hurt not the oil, right? Because that's what the whole system is built upon. is upon the love of money, the greed, the filth that's out there. And of course, the Vatican has control of all of these things. We got to stop here, but we'll start off on page 118. Next Kahan, we take over on page 118, 7 kingdoms, one paganistic religion. May Yahweh bless your understanding, man.